Avis, we're ready. It's 11:15.
Okay, well, I am very pleased to welcome guests to this morning's adult forum, Miriam and Bilal. Both of our congregations have a history of friendly relationships with Muslim congregations. Pat Morley is going to be involved in a food shelf thing this coming Saturday at Masjid Al Taqwa, which is across from the State Fair on Como Avenue. And I know that the St. James congregation has had multiple relationships over the years with feminist Muslims and other Muslims trying to do an Abrahamic faith sanctuary sharing arrangement and stuff. St. Luke's has also been involved. I have been going to Alaman Mosque or Masjid for off and on for, I don't know, a period of years now. And we have had guest speakers come a couple of times. So this is the third time. And I am Miriam is a person who I know pretty well. When I go to mosque, I go to Sisters Halakwa, which means adult ed, specifically for women. Women can go to any of the stuff, but this is one just specifically for them. And Miriam is there faithfully. She does all kinds of work on Saturday at the mosque, teaching and leading, and then Sisters Halakwa is her time to relax and learn. And she's always been so welcoming to me, as have been the other sisters. Miriam is working on a master's in Islamic studies. Her day job is managing IT projects. She is American born and an adult convert to Islam. She deliberately and intentionally considered different religions and shopped around to find the one that really fit and that made sense and that seemed right to her. I have a tremendous amount of respect and affection for her. And then Miriam, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you, Avis. Good morning, everyone. Just a quick correction. I was not born here, Avis. Everything else, you said it right. I was born in Nepal. I'm sure you guys have heard of Mount Everest. So I'm the mountain woman, and I have been in the US for, oh my God, a long time. I came here for undergraduate degree in Lincoln, Nebraska, and decided to get married and stay and have my family here. And I love Minnesota. Minnesota, if I was given a choice to live anywhere in the world, I would live right here. It's a beautiful place with a lot of good people. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to the speaker, Brother Bilal. I don't know, Brother Bilal, is your camera on?
It is now, yeah.
Okay, there you are. I have known Brother Bilal for many, many years. He is a mentor for my children, especially for boys. The way he teaches in the mosque is phenomenal. He was born and raised in Kenya, but has been here like me probably for many, many years. He has a undergraduate degree from University of Minnesota in biomedical science, biomedical engineering. However, I think you work in an IT world, Brother Bilal. My relationship with Brother Bilal is pretty much in the masjid environment where he is teaching, mentoring, talking to the children. My son, who is 22 years old, really looks up to Brother Bilal, and the way he connects with the youth is just fantastic. And he is a great speaker. So I'm excited to have him speak here in this forum. And I will help with the PowerPoint so we can he can just speak and not worry about all the other stuff.
Thank you all very much. I'm very honored and privileged to be here today talking with you all. So I might interchange between some Arabic names and English names. So I just wanted to give some context. If I say Allah, that's just the direct translation for God in Arabic. We will be talking about Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac. In Arabic, it's Ibrahim and Ismail and Isaac. So if I interchange those, just know that I'm talking about those figures. So all praise is due to God, who is magnificent in his essence. He is perfect in his attributes. He is undeniable in his presence. All praise is due to God, who is the most magnificent of names, and all praise is due to him, and that praise forever remains. So today I was asked to talk about the legacy of Prophet Abraham and the sacrifice or his sacrifice and his son's sacrifice. And I'll be talking about that in the context of one of our holidays, which we call Eid al-Adha, the Feast of Sacrifice, which is basically to commemorate his sacrifice. And then we can double click and talk specifically about the legacy of Prophet Abraham. I'd like this to be a discussion. So if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me if you need any clarification, and let this be a discussion.
Brother Bilal, should I be sharing? Should I just start from the beginning and you let me know when you're ready to move? Okay, sounds good.
And I think we can use this. I mean, the slides have, if you haven't seen them, it's mostly scripture and some sayings of the prophet. So this is just basically used as contextual information. And so, we'll be going through the slides. I mean, use it as background. And if you have any questions as to what I'm saying, I'll be happy to elaborate. So if we can go to just slide number 4. So I think we all know basically as background what us Muslims believe in. We believe we're a monotheistic religion. We believe in the one unique God. And as I said, when I began, he has the most magnificent names and sublime perfect attributes. Islam, the religion, the scripture, the Quran, and the sayings of the prophet, the last prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him, are maintained through what we call a sanad or isnad. And this is a chain of authorities attesting to the historical authenticity of a particular narration. So the chain of transmission, this biographical, includes biographical dictionaries on the lives of the narrators who transmitted these collections. And this tradition of oral narration or transmission was then recorded into books. And that's how these books were canonized, basically. And then parchments were dated and public readings were held to validate these transmissions. So basically, that's how the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad were passed down to us. And that's what we hold as the true sources of our religion, just as background. So diving in directly into the next section, and which is the topic of today's discussion, Eid. So Eid in Islam, Islam has 2 major holidays. The Eid al-Fitr, which comes after the month of Ramadan. The month of Ramadan itself is not a holiday. It's a month-long month of fasting. But then after the month, there's the post-fasting festival, which is what we call Eid al-Fitr. And then we've got Eid al-Adha, which is the Feast of Sacrifice. And this Eid is the celebration of the one central figure in all of our monotheistic religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, the Prophet Abraham. This festival, Eid al-Adha, commemorates Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son. And most Muslims believe this son to be Ishmael, to God. The festival also marks the end of the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. It is celebrated from the 10th. Was there a question? It is celebrated from the 10th through the 13th of the last month of the Islamic lunar calendar, which is Dhul Hijjah. The word Eid, E-I-D itself, is an Arabic word whose root connotation is that which comes around time after time, or that which is rejoiced. So its particular usage in Islam is the 2 major holidays, because these 2 days are meant to be those of rejoicing. The Eid al-Adha, as I mentioned, follows the Hajj, which is the pilgrimage in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, which Muslims are required to do if they can afford, once in a lifetime. And it's known as the Feast of Sacrifice because it traditionally includes the sacrifice of an animal that is permitted for food, like a lamb, as an act of thanksgiving for God's mercy. The food is then distributed to friends, family, and neighbors. Here in the US, issued postage stamps to commemorate the two Eids. If you remember, the blue and red postage stamps with some golden Arabic calligraphy. So these have been issued in previous years. Just celebrating, talking a little bit more about Eid al-Adha, and then we'll go into the Abrahamic sacrifice. As I mentioned, for those who can afford to do so, Muslim families are expected to purchase an animal, a camel, cow, goat, or lamb, and then slaughter it according to halal standards, which just means that very Islamic, humane standards, as a symbolic gesture of Abraham's sacrifice to God. Halal meat, as you might know, needs to meet high standards of consumption, ensuring the animal is clean and healthy before being sacrificed, and that the animal's throat is slit very swiftly to minimize pain and suffering. In fact, an animal cannot be killed in front of another animal. I mean, it's supposed to be as less anxiety inducing as possible. And, you know, the meat or the food is supposed to be distributed. So only 1/3 of the food can be kept for the family doing the sacrifice. 2/3 has to be distributed to friends and family, neighbors, as well as to the poor and needy. Eid al-Adha is actually the greater of the two Eids. And traditional celebration goes for about 3 or 4 days. Unlike the Eid after the month of Ramadan, which is more well known, but is actually the smaller or the lesser of the Eids. Any questions on the Eids before we jump into the story of Abraham and Ishmael?
Bilal, this is Patrick. Alaikum assalam. I had a question about the Eid celebration that is, I believe, in May this year. Is that the Eid you were referring to, or is that the Eid of the sacrifice?
The Eid in May of this year is the post-fasting Eid, so that's the Eid following the month of Ramadan. Yeah.
Okay.
And then about 70 days after that is when the Eid of sacrifice is held.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And Brother Bilal, this is William. Is it still a requirement that Muslims in the United States sacrifice an animal for this Eid?
Yes, so those who can should. And what happens is that you'll see a lot of people going to farms outside of the Twin Cities and you know, making arrangements with the farmers, and they sacrifice the animals there. Obviously, it has to be done according to our guidelines and standards, but those who can should, yes.
And our children absolutely love it. So when that time comes, you know, like all of us consume meat, but then we're so hesitant to see the animal being slaughtered, but to show them there is a human way to slaughter an animal and consume, that God has given you this opportunity to do that. So the kids, my kids, look forward to that day to visit the farm and have the animal slaughtered and bring the meat and eat that fresh meat. So.
And Mariam, what animal do you usually slaughter?
So my daughter, you know, doesn't like lamb and goat these days anymore. So the cow is probably one of our favorite, but then we do go with goat or sheep, depending on what is available in the farm.
Thank you. Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Have either of you done the Hajj yet?
Yes, I have.
Alhamdulillah, I have as well. I have done it twice. So 2013 was once and 2018 was the other time I did it.
Okay. Are you gonna, in your presentation, talk a little bit more about the Hajj?
I can, yes, we can, because this Eid, the one we're talking about, comes directly after the Hajj, and a lot of the rituals in the Hajj are directly taken from the life of Abraham and his family.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So, as we mentioned, Eid al-Adha, the celebration stems from a familiar story that is often heard in Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And like the two religions, Ibrahim is a major prophet in our religion. And while some associate this story with Isaac, the majority of the Muslims, excuse me, attribute the holiday to Ishmael, Abraham's first son. And so going into the story a little bit, it commemorates Abraham's and Ishmael's willingness to obey God's demand of sacrifice. Abraham had a vision, some say in his dream, that he was sacrificing his son Ishmael. Now this came repeatedly. So, tradition tells us that after the first night, he thought it was a vision from the devil. And then the vision came again to him the following night. And when he woke up, he sacrificed some animals, but the vision kept recurring. And he realized that he was actually supposed to carry out this vision. A major thing, if you go to the next slide, actually, maybe. Yeah, one of the major differences here between Islam and the other sister monotheistic religions is that Abraham, in fact, consulted his son. Now, he was about 84 years old. We know from the Quran and from tradition when his son Ishmael was born. In this verse here that is being displayed, God asks Abraham to migrate. And so he migrates and he asks God for a child among the righteous. So God gives him a child, blesses him with a son, Ishmael. And God says that this son is going to be a righteous son from amongst the righteous, a boy who would be ready to basically sacrifice. So then Abraham, after these repeated visions, he goes to his son Ishmael and says that this is what I'm seeing in my dream. And I feel like this is something that I need to carry out. And we see here Ishmael, who's just old enough to follow his father around, basically saying, do as you commanded, and you will find me as someone who is willing to follow God's commandment. This, to me, even though Abraham, a major prophet, is in his 90s, very wise and old, the fact that he consults his child is very reassuring to me, and I think is a great example to all of us. That these family meetings that we have with our children are really important. So they both go to the place where the sacrifice is supposed to be happening. In tradition, we're told that Ishmael is not only willing, but he tells his dad, Abraham, on how to carry out the sacrifice so that there is no hesitation towards the end. And on the way to the place where the sacrifice is going to be offered, the devil repeatedly, Satan comes and tries to divert Abraham and Ishmael from going forward with what God has commanded them to do. Here, actually, Abraham throws some pebbles toward the devil to ward him off. And when we talk about the Hajj, this is something that the people offering the pilgrimage do as a symbolic gesture towards what Abraham did. So in the places where the devil appeared, there were 3 times the devil appeared, and 3 times Abraham threw some pebbles to ward him off. Muslims every year do the same thing. They go to those places and symbolically throw pebbles at what, there's these concrete pillars that are supposed to symbolize where the devil appeared. Finally, as Abraham was about to basically sacrifice Ishmael, and if you can go to the next slide. God called out to him and said, "You have fulfilled the vision, and thus we reward the doers of good." So before he could even carry out the act, he was told to stop, and telling him that what he was required to do, he had fulfilled. What they had both been required to do, they had fulfilled, and instead they were offered a ram or a sheep to sacrifice. Any questions on the story?
Yes, hello, Brother Bilal. This is Mary Kelby.
Hi, Mary.
As a mother, I've always wondered in this story the role of the mothers. What role does Hagar play in this, and what role, if any, does Sarah have in this?
Yeah, good question. So according to the Islamic tradition, Sarah hasn't had Isaac yet. So, Isaac's not born yet, the second son. In terms of Hagar, tradition says that the devil came to her as well, but she warded him off also. So she was also very committed to the cause. And just going into a little bit of detail, when, Ishmael's telling his father on how his father needs to carry out the sacrifice. He says, bind my hands and blindfold me and remove my shirt and give it to my mother afterwards. So, going back a little bit, when Ishmael was just a toddler, the Islamic tradition has that God commanded Abraham to take both Hagar and Ishmael to what is today Mecca, a barren land, right, that had no one living there, as a test for Abraham. And he was not allowed to talk to them either. So his test was that he needed to take them and leave them in the middle of the desert in this valley. And so Hagar's, confused. She doesn't know why her husband is leaving her and her toddler in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of this desert. And all he's able to say is that this is a command from God. And the moment she hears that, she is completely submissive and understands that, this is from God, and she complies willingly. And then we know that, and I'll talk about the Hajj here a little bit. They run out of food. Hagar runs out of food, and the baby Ishmael's crying. So what she does is she tries to look for people or some source of food or sustenance to feed her baby, because they're completely out of food. And what she does is there are 2 small hills present, what they're called Safa and Marwa. And she runs between these hills, climbing up the hills and scanning the horizon for anyone, for a caravan that's on its way, so that she could sustain the baby. And as she goes back and forth between these hills, Gabriel comes down, and Ishmael, who's a little baby, his heel, as he's like just playing, or when his heel strikes the ground, Gabriel causes a well to gush out from underneath him. And this well is what is called Zamzam, and it's existent until today, the water of Zamzam. So Hagar comes back and she sees that now there's a stream of water, there's abundance of water, right? And soon enough, birds come, and because of the birds, caravans come, and this becomes a small township. And this is the beginning of the town of Mecca. or the city of Mecca. Today in pilgrimage, when Muslims go on pilgrimage, part of the pilgrimage rites are to run between the two hills, Safa and Marwa, 7 times, exactly the same way that Hagar had done when Ishmael was a baby. And then after they're done running between the 2 hills, then they drink from the very same well, Zamzam, that sprung underneath Ishmael's feet.
I want to jump in real quick. I've had the water of Zamzam, and it was really good. Probably the best water I've ever had.
Yeah, so I think it's good as well. She definitely, was consulted, and she had a part to play, because tradition has that Satan did come to her as well, and she was, willing. Was there another question? Sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment, if I may, and that is that, Sarah and Abraham were old and childless, and, God came to Abraham in a vision and said that you will be, the father of many, father of a nation. And he told Sarah, and she laughed. So she said, I'm old. This is not happening with me. So she gave Abraham her slave, Hagar, and, and he had a son by Hagar. And then Sarah became jealous and basically drove Hagar and her son Ishmael out of camp. This is the Judeo-Christian story, into the desert. And you would think they would have died in the desert. We don't hear too much until Abraham passes away, and then Ishmael comes back for the funeral.
Okay.
And then the Islamic tradition is very different. It says that Abraham continues to love Hagar and his son Ishmael, and despite Sarah hating them, he continues to visit them and love them, and he cares for them, and God cares for them. And we're thinking a lot more about racism and prejudice these days. And Sarah has this glaring blind spot. She despises Hagar and Ishmael, and Abraham shows us a better way, and God shows us a better way to continue loving them and caring for them and providing for them.
Brother, under the influence of modern feminism, in our prayers in our church, whenever Abraham is invoked, so also is Sarah. And I wonder whether there's any parallel to that in contemporary Islamic liturgies, whether Hagar's name is ever invoked along with that of Abraham, in the story of Ishmael.
They're both mentioned, right? So Sarah was his wife, and then he ended up, she gave him Hagar, but he ended up marrying Hagar as well. And I always wondered, because he always lived with Sarah. He visited Hagar every now and then, but he never lived with Hagar. Like, his visits to Hagar and Ishmael were far and few between, right? So the first time he leaves them in the desert, and then he comes back, and now he's going to be sacrificing Ishmael. And then he comes back and basically builds the Kaaba, the central mosque, if you will, in the Muslim faith in Mecca, the Kaaba. He builds it with Ishmael. And so, his visits are infrequent. I mean, most of the time he's living with Sarah. And, then God blesses Sarah with Isaac. And there's a verse in the Quran which says exactly that the angels come to Sarah and say, God has given good tidings of a son. And she laughs. She's like, I'm old and my husband's old. What, how can we bear children now? I'm barren. And the verse in Arabic is very pretty, because the angels say, "Ata'jabina min amrillah," are you amazed at the will of God, basically. And so she gets Isaac, and then she gets Jacob from Isaac as well.
Can I ask another question?
Of course.
I've been asked more than once by people skeptical about our religion, including people in my own family, people saying, I refuse to worship or acknowledge a God who asked me to slaughter my own child. Presumably that question asked within among Arabic-speaking people as well, and I wonder how you deal with it.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, like the new atheists, especially like attacking not just Islam, but all three religions. They're like, how can you worship a God that asks his prophet to sacrifice his sons, right? And so that comes up a lot. One is that I think I've got 3 points. The first is that no matter how much Abraham loved his son Ishmael, no matter how intensely and immensely he loved Ishmael, we've got to remember that God loved Ishmael more than Abraham could ever love him, right? The Prophet Muhammad tells us that of all the love that all human beings and animals have for their for each other and for their children, that's just one part out of 100 compared to the love that God has for his creation. And then we've got to remember who Abraham was. I mean, this wasn't the first time that he was being tested. This is the same Abraham that had walked away from a fire. This was the same Abraham that had witnessed, at least in the Quran, the miracle of resurrection, right? So he knew, I mean, and you know, just sidebar, like since Adam came to earth, right, and the first prophets and the first people, in my understanding, and I'm not a scholar, it was mostly like figuring out the ways of the land, figuring out the ways of living in this world, right? But with Abraham, we see the manifestation of God's plan for all humanity, because through him come the Abrahamic faith. I mean, the fact that you and I are speaking here today about Abraham, somebody that we share in common, just goes to show that this needed to be a man, a giant in terms of his commitment and servitude to God, right? And the closer you are to God, the bigger the test. And God in the Islamic faith calls him Khalilullah, which means a friend of God. God said, Abraham is my friend, in addition to being a prophet. And, you know, God calls him a nation. So he needed to be that strong. And the closer you are, the stronger you are, the more severe the test. Secondly, in the Quranic narration, as we've mentioned, and in the Islamic faith, this was consensual. Ishmael was taken with consent. Hagar knew, Ishmael knew. It wasn't meant to be as a surprise. He actually consults his son. He's like, I'm getting these visions repeatedly. I think that this is an order from God. What do you say? What is a 6-year-old, 8-year-old boy supposed to say at that point in time? Right? And third, and this is, we believe strongly in this, and I'm going to read commentaries on this story from major Muslim jurists and theologians and scholars. They say that the benefit in God commanding his friend Abraham to sacrifice his son was not so that the sacrifice would occur, but rather so that both the father and son would submit firmly and completely to his commandment. Once that benefit occurred, then the actual carrying out of the killing became harmful for them both. Therefore, God abrogated it and commanded him to sacrifice a lamb instead, right? So when Abraham positioned Ishmael for the sacrifice, a call from the direction of the mountain informed him that you fulfilled the vision, right? Thus making his fulfillment based solely on the firm resolve to perform the deed despite not actually performing the sacrifice. That's because he went as far as he could. The test here was, are you going to submit? Is Ishmael going to submit? So the way we see it in the Muslim faith is that, you know, sort of like the trust fall analogy, where you let yourself fall knowing that your partner is going to catch you. Like it happens in circuses, and you know, you don't intend to get hurt. And that was Abraham. I mean, he's old at this point in time. He's been through multiple trials. He knows that God is not going to cause harm.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions?
I have a comment.
Sure, yeah.
Jesus offers himself as a willing sacrifice and is sacrificed. So there's a really strong parallel here. Thank you.
Yeah, I think in the Christian faith, that stuff, we as Muslims see it slightly differently, obviously, because, well, you know, at this point in time, with the sacrifice of the lamb or the ram in the Islamic faith, then human sacrifices are then taken away. And going forward, the sacrifice mainly becomes of animals. And even then, I think the core aspect of the religion, right? And the reason why Abraham and Ishmael are revered so much is because they're models of surrendering one's will to God. And that is the underlying, basically, that is what Islam is, to surrender, to submit yourself wholly, your ego, to God. Even when you sacrifice animals for the Eid, and I think there's a verse here somewhere that says that it's not the blood and the meat and the bones that reaches God, it is your piety. And ultimately, that's what matters, is that the condition of your heart. And that's why you can't ever judge somebody based on outwardly appearance or outwardly actions, because ultimately what matters is what they have in their heart. Any other questions?
Brother Bilal, I just put in the chat. There's an interesting commentary from the book of Hebrews, which just talks about how Abraham may have just reasoned that God could simply just raise Isaac back.
Okay.
So there's just this great, it kind of reinforces what you're saying, this tremendous strength of faith that he had, and that God was simply able to just do whatever was needed.
Yeah, and that resonates with me because, this is a verse in the Quran in the 2nd chapter, actually, where even Abraham's like questioning God's ability to bring things from the dead, right? Not in terms of like his doubting. It's just like he wants to make his faith even firmer. So he asks God, how do you do that? And God asks him to basically take some dead birds, cut them up, and put them into, separate their pieces and put them in different areas, in 4 different areas, and God brings those back to life. So he sees that miracle with his own eyes. He experiences that. So he knows that God is able to do that. Yes, so that definitely goes along with that. So like I said, the Hajj, Islam has 5 pillars, and we've got 6 minutes. I want to be cognizant of our time. And those are prayer, giving in charity, the creed, fasting, and then the Hajj, which is a pilgrimage to Mecca for those who can afford. Now, a lot of the rites within the Hajj are based, as I mentioned, on the life of Abraham and his family. So Muslims spend some time in an area called Mina, and then go to the mountain of, we call it Mount Arafah. And this is on the 9th day of Dhul Hijjah. Of the last month. And basically, this is the place where the Prophet Muhammad gave his final sermon. And, everyone's dressed in the same 2 sheets of white cloth. And this is a day to ask for forgiveness from God, because the Prophet told us that on this day, God forgives more than on any other day. And it is actually very symbolic that regardless of who you are, you know, your wealth status or your color or your gender, right? You're all wearing, at least for the men, two sheets of white cloth, standing and asking forgiveness from God. You know, Malcolm X, when he became Muslim, he was actually Nation of Islam, and you know, he was very against the whites, and his message was all anti-white. It was when he went for Hajj, and when he stood in the valley, on the mountain of Arafah, when he saw that all man was equal, and the only thing that differentiated any two people on this world, right, is your piety, which actually no one can measure. It's only for God to measure. He actually changed his stance and came back and, you know, apologized for the sort of like racist ideals that he had been preaching. So Hajj is very important to us. We circumambulate, we go around the Kaaba. The Kaaba was built by Abraham and Ishmael. You know, God in the Quran commands Abraham to build a house of worship. And Abraham said, you know, who's going to come here? How will people know? How am I supposed to bring people here to worship you? And God says, you just build a house and we'll bring the people. And, you know, over 2 million Muslims go there every year, except for this last year. And I don't know what's going to happen this year, but yeah. And then, you know, on the way, Muslims are supposed to throw pebbles on these pillars that signify Satan, the devil, just the way Abraham on his way to slaughter or sacrifice Ishmael had to throw pebbles toward the devil. And then Muslims then on the day of Eid, which is the 10th of the month of Hajj, they sacrifice animals, you know, to commemorate basically the sacrifice of Abraham and Ishmael.
I'd just like to say there's a lot of good comments in the chat, people connecting what you're saying to things in the Christian tradition.
Yeah, I've been looking at it. So
Okay.
yeah, and you know, obviously, like I said, the fact that, I mean, it was his sacrifice that today even brings all of us together, right?
Yeah. I particularly love the comment about Soren Kierkegaard. You know, he wrote a book, you know, talked about leap of faith, and, you know, and he talked, you know, there's this tension. Was Abraham being obedient, or was he being trusting that what he's hearing doesn't make any sense, but somehow God's going to make it work out. So for Kierkegaard, it's all about Abraham trusting God. The relationship with God is just what's really key. Definitely, yes. And I think and there's a lot of like Islamic commentary that relies on that point as well. Just he trusts God to be able, because of, you know, the experiences that he's been through.
Brother Bilal, can I ask one more question?
Yes, of course.
I tend to, in my faith, go to the touchstone of all of us being created in the image of God as being the thing that I see unity between us all. What is the touchstone in Islam? Where can we find that point of connection with you? Is it the same place?
I think it's the same place. And are you talking specifically with regards to all humanity or the Abrahamic faiths?
I'm just thinking in general, like, you know, we're talking about, you know, looking at racial justice and trying to promote a sense of togetherness and overcoming divisions. So I'm always curious about where those points of connection are.
Yeah, so there's a verse in the Quran that says, and, you know, the Quran, it addresses Muslims, but sometimes it specifically addresses everyone. So this verse starts with, God says, Ya ayyuhan nas, O mankind. So he's addressing all of mankind. He says, I have created you, inna khalaqnakum min dhakari wa untha. I have created you into male and female, into nations and tribes of different colors. And then he says why, and the differentiation. He says, so that you may know each other. right? So that you may know each other, like the differences in each other, and through that know the diversity of your lands and of your people. And then he ends the verse by saying that the best of you are those who are the most pious. So this is what we come down to, is that, every man, there is no difference between man, woman, or different colors or cultures. The one difference is how close are you to God? How pious are you? And other than that, I mean, we're all the same, and God loves us, all of us, right? Yeah, thank you for posting that.
Oh, that is so beautiful. It is so good, Brother Bilal, to hear you talk and tell the story from a Muslim perspective. I'm familiar with the Christian story of the sacrifice of Isaac, but not so much the Muslim view. It's so good to know how closely we're connected. I'm thankful that you guys both, you and Miriam both, were able to come and share with us.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you very much from the entire congregation to both Brother Bilal and Sister Miriam. We deeply appreciate your sharing your time with us and these wonderful stories and insights. Really, really appreciate.
Thank you so much. We appreciate being here too as well.
Yeah. Right now, we Minnesota Episcopalians are not able to gather in person. Our church doors are locked and we meet on Zoom. So we would not be able to visit the mosque right now, even if we had an invitation, because of the bishop's concerns about COVID. But when COVID is better, we would love to connect more in person and hopefully build a friendship between congregations. Do you know of ways that we can do that?
Yeah, I'll let Sister Miriam comment on that.
Yeah, so we do have a outreach program. One of the program that we do, and I apologize if you have to drop because I know we're at time. Very much appreciate you guys bringing us here. We do have a program called Bridges for Peace, where we bring in people to talk about our faith, share with you some good food from the Middle East, and talk about religion in a way, and then also have you answer your questions. So that's one way. And then we, in Ramadan, Avis knows this very well, we do have dinner every day in the mosque. I mean, we all gather together, and I have not eaten at home other than the COVID year last year for many years. So we do welcome you. I mean, we can coordinate, Avis and I can touch base and coordinate on, if that works out for you, you can come and share a meal with us and just talk. So that would be more informal. And then the third way would be just to have you guys, so focus on you guys to come and visit us and, talk about our faith, and then talk about if there are any questions. So there are three ways to kind of connect, and you are always welcome. Our mosque doors are open for anyone who wants to come. And Avis, you have come on Friday prayer sometimes and observed prayers as well. So you're always welcome to come and join us in smaller gathering like that as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for this session of unity.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you.
Shukran.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pat, I'm so thankful for the stuff that you do with the food shelf. So you have an ongoing relationship with Masjid Al-Taqwa?
Masjid Al-Taqwa, I mean, it's simple. They provide a food shelf, and you volunteer and show up and help them with that.
Okay.
And just be yourself. I go for the service, but I go as much for the friendship as the service.
How long have you been doing that?
A couple of years now, at least, I think. I'm not super consistent. There's some Saturdays. It's only one Saturday a month, and sometimes I've run into conflicts. But Yeah, it's, and it's not, like I said, it's a small service, but you're serving, 15, 20 families over the course of an hour. And most of it is just working with lots of other people to get that food out the door. And those other people are almost exclusively Muslim, but not entirely. It's just like, I don't know, lots of other things we do, Peacecraft and other things, just hang out in the neighborhood and get to know people. I would not recommend, you can ask lots of questions. The Imam is very open to lots of questions and whatnot, but I would encourage you to go as you would any other social endeavor, and just be yourself. Try not to bring an agenda.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank Avis for setting this all up. It has been Avis's project since last year. We've been talking about it, right, Avis?
Yes.
And it has come to fruition. We really appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
You bet. It's something that's important to me. I really would love to see our congregation have a friendship with a Muslim congregation. I'm invested at Al-Aman, but I think, we've got other options too.
Well, one thing to remember is that technically there really isn't a congregation in the sense, in the Christian sense, that people make a commitment to go to a particular mosque. The commitment is to pray 5 times a day. And if you happen to be near a mosque, you can go to that mosque. But there is no such thing as far as I understand, and I'm hardly a scholar, like he said, but there's no such thing really as membership of a particular mosque. You just meet people at a mosque, and there are, people are people. They get into creatures of habit, right? So but a lot of times it's about proximity. They go to the nearest mosque because it's a mosque. So, but you're right. At the same time, people tend to gravitate towards a single place and use that more than others. And so there's this sort of de facto membership, but per se, it's not the case.
But they do have a community.
Yeah.
They do have a budget and a building fund,
That kind of thing,
yeah.
I just want to jump in and encourage, if you haven't read Dave Larson's article in the Epistle, it sort of revolves around the topic you're just raising, Pat. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I read that. It was a good piece.
Yeah, but it's sort of that same idea that it's about what constitutes community and membership and that kind of thing. I thought he raised some interesting questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'll be there next week. I can't remember what happened last month, but it's I usually show up about 11:30, 11:45, and I think technically we serve food from 12 to 1, and then there's a tear down. And then I like hanging out. I play ping pong with the Imam after everybody leaves. A lot of fun. He just slaughters me every time, but it's as much about the conversation. So yeah, it's a very interesting and fun experience. And with that, I got to take off. I'm grieving because I broke my coffee pot this morning, and so I'm not able to. And I was so proud of myself because, like 2 months ago, we broke the first one, and I was like, "Oh, I have a backup." Well, today I broke the backup, so I'm devastated. So I have to go. I might. Well, if you go to like a Goodwill or Salvation Army, they've got just hundreds of, because the pot lasts a lot longer than the maker, so people save the pot.
Coffee for Lent.
What's that?
Give up coffee for Lent.
Next Lent. No, I can't do that this tomorrow.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
All right.
Thank you all.